Broadcasting live from the moon and back, this is The Coin Chat, the most trusted voice for all things cryptocurrency. Each week we dissect an important issue and cut through the noise and misinformation out there in the world of blockchain, cryptocurrency, and ICOs, capturing the facts that truly matter to you that will give you an edge in this fast-moving emerging market. The who, what, where, when, and how of what you need to know in crypto to get ahead so you don't get left behind. Now here are your co-hosts, financial and crypto experts Yuri Cataldo and Steve Good.
Hey, this is Steve Good on the Coin Chat with Yuri Cataldo, and we are joined by special guest Mary Camacho, Executive Director from Holochain. So, Mary, welcome to our episode of Women in Blockchain. It's great to have you.
Thanks. It's great to be here. It's a pleasure.
So, before we jump in, would love to know, how is it that you got interested in technology and got started in it yourself?
Well, that's interesting. I've actually been in tech for all of my career since the early 90s when I started working in telecom. I wasn't hired in as a technologist or computers or anything like that. I was in operations. But this job that I walked into when I was 22 years old basically showed me an office and said, here you go. And I looked around and everything was manual. Like they wanted me to write down the name of everything. Wow. Like phone bills that had to be submitted for cell towers month after month to be paid. And they wanted me to write them in by hand on forms. And I'm like, wow. Why? And so I just started automating things. And at the time, this was before, even Access was created. So I was working in, I think it was FileMaker Pro. And
oh my God, that's just like
yeah, exactly. We're talking back ways, but I was like,
are you just away by talking about software we know from?
Well, let's start. We're starting early. You asked me how I got into it. No, but it was really interesting because it wasn't even a relational database at the time, and so trying to connect the dots, trying to push things, and then I started figuring out how to code. Then Access came out. Then I went to get to classes on how do I make all this stuff go together and work. Then suddenly I was designing systems. Then I was rolling them out to other people. Then I was working in accounting software. It just went from one thing to another. But basically, it's been my entire career. I mean, eventually I was working with web technologies and developing websites in the early days, then web applications after that when they started, growing. Now I'm working in crypto and web and hosting and telecom all mixed together and rolled into one.
That's so cool. That's amazing.
It's all together.
Yeah. So how do you find it when it comes to, trying to hire people, women, to hire women in the chain? I mean, I know you guys have had adverts out. I mean, and I'm sure
right.
You're looking for people all the time. So tell us about that.
Yeah, well, we've been growing our team for the last 6 to 8 months. I mean, we did our ICO back in April of last year. And so it's been quite the process to build the team. And we're completely remote, so we're all over the world and pretty flexible about that. And it's been really tough to find women for technical roles. And we've had our attention on this. We've even participated in Women in Blockchain events. But the reality is we don't get a lot of women applying for the technical roles. We actually have 2 women in our technical team. One is in UI UX, and then the other is a front-end developer. So it's not that we don't have any women on our team. We do, but we have been targeting, that as an intent for many of the roles, and we just don't get a lot of qualified applicants that come in. And quite honestly, we just don't get hardly any women applicants in for the technical.
Is there anything you can do to target more women for applying for jobs in general, or is it kind of, I mean, I don't know, do men go to different job sites than women might go to? I don't know. I never thought about it, but.
I can say that, for certain roles, we get more women or more men from certain postings than others. For example, if I go and post on the crypto jobs site, almost all men apply. That's who's paying attention to that particular Twitter feed, that particular website, all those different things. Mm-hmm. But, we did go and, like I said, to events specifically about women in blockchain. But the issue is that not a lot of women out of those kinds of programs right now are actually experienced developers yet. They're in early stages, just
Sure.
kind of getting into a development career. So that doesn't really work as a channel for hiring just yet.
Mm-hmm.
I'm involved in a lot of women in technology groups. I'd certainly send information out, but I think it may be because we're in the crypto space. It may be because we're using cutting edge technologies. I mean, we're using Rust in our core, and we prefer having developers come in with Rust. That's a hard skill to find pretty much across the board, much less to target it and say, oh, we'd like women Rust developers at this stage. So that's what we're finding.
Yeah.
Wow.
I wonder if there's also a certainty type of factor in there. I listened to a MIT researcher who worked with LinkedIn to try to find ways to get more women to apply for jobs. And they found out that by posting the number of applicants somewhere on the application, that they had more women apply, regardless of what the number was. So they had some kind of thesis where the more certainty associated with the job, that the higher probability of women applying.
Interesting.
Really?
So were they going for a level of comfort or assuredness that it's real, or I mean, what is it that the number represented?
They were kind of vague on that part of it, but their thesis was partially of, I think, men have a tendency of just applying for jobs that sometimes they don't feel qualified for. They'll just blatantly apply for things. And they've noticed that when discussing it with certain women's groups, that they want to make sure they check all of the boxes. And apparently when they check all the boxes and they can see the percentage or the number of people who are applying for this job, that those odds went up.
Wow.
That's interesting. I'm a little bit of an oddball in my career, in my field. And what you just said reminded me of something from early in my career, which was I made a decision in my 20s to never apply for a job that I was fully qualified for.
Mm-hmm.
Because I got a job one time when I was fully qualified, and I was bored out of my mind.
Yeah, I was going to say, why would you want to apply for something that you're already fully qualified for? Then there's no growth opportunity.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so that's just been sort of a career, choice.
So if people had other development skills,
women think that way.
Yeah.
So if women had other development skills, let's say if they had C# or if they had Solidity or other development skills, would that not mean that they couldn't learn Rust and work?
Oh, certainly. It's not that even all of the roles require that per se. That's just been an area where we've been especially trying to find developers. So we don't have all the roles say that you must know something like Rust. We've had, basically full stack where almost it doesn't really matter what you've worked in the past. Holochain is so different that if you have any sort of either full stack web, client server background, those sorts of things help. Obviously, we like the developers that have growth orientation. So if they're wanting to learn new things, if they're self-motivated, if they're used to working in remote sort of situations and like it and actually thrive in those, environments, those are some of the things we're really looking for with people.
Yeah.
But we don't typically say you have to have this one skill. I mean, occasionally we have a DevOps role that is very explicit. We really need somebody with certain experience. Or for the Holochain core team, which is where we really have to have somebody who at least knows the basics of Rust or typed, languages at the very least. That's important. But no, we're not that harsh about it. So we just don't get a lot of applicants.
Yeah. No, I just didn't know whether or not that kind of a skill might scare people off who, as we said, if you don't have the skill, you don't apply, as opposed to, hey, if you've got good techie development skills, please apply here and you're going to learn new skills like Rust, which will make you even more valuable to the world.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, we do get a lot of applicants for a lot of the jobs. It's not as if we're lacking for numbers on it. And that's really, I'm super grateful about that because it means we can actually get the right fit for our needs and the right person that's going to fit inside the team from a culture perspective and sort of be able to work with the other developers in certain groups.
Sure.
And that's critical. But to your point, I mean, it it is tough. It's not as easy to have qualified applicants come in who are women, and we'd like more of them.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting for me is that, having worked for an Indian company for a number of years, what I found there was the remarkable number of women that were in development and testing roles. It was just like, having worked in London for a number of years and worked with U.S. and British and European companies for all these years, and the number of developers we had that were women was practically nil. And then I'm in the midst of this Indian culture, and it was about 40% women, literally, between developers and testers and analysts. And I'm like, this is great. It felt so normal and balanced. It didn't feel like it was so heavily male skewed, where men were just being men and being a little bit like too comfortable being men in a room because there were no women there. It felt more like a normal working environment. And what's interesting in India is all these technical universities that are encouraging technical expertise and experience. Even to the point that after I left Infosys and Yuri and I embarked on another project for a period of time, our lead developer was a woman from India.
Yeah,
she was a great developer, and so we let her run the thing because she was great at it. But it was a really nice, eye-opening experience for me to see that level of engagement from women, because the country encourages that level of education. Unfortunately, on the flip side, India has not been very supportive of blockchain development, so that's probably not helped for the women getting involved in that space.
I think it is interesting about the domain space, and to what you were saying, Yuri, about what it is that has people apply for certain jobs versus others. When I was working in telecom, I had this experience. I was in IT and in telecom, and it was great. I walked into this room where we were starting a new project, and there were 4 women in the room, period, running the project. We had data warehouse expertise, we had application architects, we had me sort of leading the project, and there was somebody else, I think it was one of the developers, just another developer who was there for the beginning where we were setting the course for this project, and we looked around at each other and went, have you ever had this happen before? I mean, it was just so odd. Never will forget that experience.
Wow.
Mary, could you talk a little bit about your journey to Csuite? Because I think in some of the articles we've been researching and looking at, it's like less than 7% of women developers make it to Csuite, and there's a huge ceiling there. So in your own journey, what are some things that you did that kind of pushed you along the way?
Startup. It's all startup. I mean, I think it's so difficult to go the corporate route and end up as an executive. It's really tough. You get stuck in the VP levels for the most part. And for me, I have always, I spoke earlier about, not wanting a job that I was already skilled for. I have always had a growth orientation to my work. And so startup has just been a natural place for me to fit in. I've been creating companies and creating products, I mean, practically since my mid-20s, late 20s. And I think that sort of thing gives you the experience of seeing the whole, of having to be responsible for the whole. And maybe you do it in somewhat neophyte ways early on because you don't know what you don't know when you're getting started. But you just keep doing that and you build it. And I've gone back and forth between the corporate world and the startup world and over the last 20 years. But my love really is bringing innovation and startup technologies into the world. And so when this one came around in particular, some of Arthur Brock, who's one of the founders, is actually a former partner in a previous company. So he is one of the people who reached out and asked me to kind of come and work with him. And we weren't even sure what role I was going to take on here at the company, because I could have just as easily ended up in product development and been working more closely with our technical teams. But what was needed at the time was sort of bringing it all together and holding that whole strategically. And that's what I had a capacity for doing, and having worked in operations, worked in finance, worked in product. And that view is just something that you can't get easily when you work in the corporate world. You tend to be more sort of geared in one direction or another. And so it's, if women aren't going and saying, oh, I want to shift into something completely different and learn this other area